Hello, Nickel. I'm Jonathan Little, and in this video, we're just going to get right to the hands that you sent me. And right off the bat, we see they fold around to you, and you elect to blast it with the ace-queen offsuit. This is not a good strategy. It doesn't matter if this is a free roll or anything like that. You want to play good, fundamentally sound poker unless you know your opponent is awful. Now, you have a whopping 5 hands on this player, so we know nothing about him. So I would just simply make a standard raise to about 3.5 big blinds or limp. Either one is fine, but when you blast it like this, unless your opponent is atrocious, he's only going to put money in the pot when he has a really good hand. And that's going to result in him folding the vast majority of the time. Queen 4 suited should basically always be folded, even if there are limpers or whatever. It's just not a great hand. So with pocket sixes, you raise to 4 big blinds, and I do see that we are quite deep stacked. I say quite deep stacked. We're not like insanely deep stacked, but we're somewhat deep stacked. So in this scenario, I would typically raise to about 3 big blinds, maybe even 2.5 big blinds. As you start making it bigger and bigger, your opponents are going to only continue with better and better hands, and you don't want them continuing with great hands. You want them to continue with junky stuff. And when you do make it so big, you make it hard to get action by the hands that you crush. So you need to typically make it smaller. Flop comes, he checks, you bet. This is a board where you do need to bet. It's a spot where you're not really loving it if your opponent continues. This is another good example, right? Like imagine you bet 1,000. Well, what's your opponent going to call with? He's going to call with only a jack or better, and you're going to be in terrible shape. So you don't want to bet big. Instead, you want to be betting on the small side. And right here, I think a bet of 250 would be quite nice because then he can call with all sorts of worse stuff. But when you bet 450, now he's probably going to call with mostly hands that beat you, and that's not good. So it seems like you are trying to protect your hand as opposed to get value from worse stuff. And also when you use bigger bet sizes, it makes your bluffs more costly when they fail. So especially with your marginal made hands, which is what you're going to have a lot of the time, you're not getting action from hands that you beat. And when you do happen to bluff with the same size, you are going to lose more money. So this is not a good strategy in this scenario. You'd much rather use small bet sizes. Turn the opponent leads, it's a pretty terrible spot now. This is a spot where if your opponent is decent, he should lead a lot. Often he should be leading small, but people should lead a lot whenever the middle card pairs, because presumably you'd be checking behind with a lot of middle pairs, or betting tiny, but you didn't bet tiny, so therefore you probably don't have a middle pair, although just so happens you do. So in this scenario, I think you probably just need to fold. You may say, well, why fold here? Well, of the draws that are available, you block 8-6 and 6-4, right? You block those with your 2 sixes, so it's hard for him to have that. So the only bluffs that are really available are 10-9, 10-8, and 9-8. And, you know, that is a lot of combinations of hands your opponent could have, but he could also just have a 7. And I don't know what stakes this tournament's from, but I'm presuming most players in most games are just leading kind of honestly. So I think I would just fold. And when he bets again on the river, this is one of these spots where now I think it's actually a much closer call, because think about this, right? If the opponent's range to lead the turn was a 7 or a draw or a jack, would the opponent really blast it on the river with a jack when the queen comes? Probably not, right? So that means the opponent likely has either a 7 or one of the busted draws. Now, this is a spot where you need to be counting combinations of hands your opponent can have, right? Say he has 16 of each gut shot straight draw. I'm completely going to discount 8, 6, and 6, 4. I mean, he could have those too, but that's 48 combinations of hands, right? 16 times 3. So now, how many 7s does he have? Well, he has ace 7. There's 8 of those. King 7. There's 8 of those. Queen 7. There are... Well, I'll tell you how to do this. You take the number of 7s left, 2, times the number of the other card left, which for an ace, there are 4 aces left, so 2 times 4 is 8. Right, so 8 ace king. I'm sorry, ace 8 ace 7. It's a tongue twister. 8 king 7, 6 queen 7. Right, because there are 2 7s and 3 queens. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 jack 7s. 8 10 7s. 8 9 7s. 8 8 7s, etc. So in this scenario, it may be roughly 50-50. Or even tilted towards bluffs. And anytime that your opponent has more bluffs in their range, you have an easy call with all of your bluff catchers. The question is, would your opponent do this with all of his bluffs? And I don't know. I mean, this is one of these spots where you just don't know what's going to happen. But very often, you're going to find that the play that you made here of calling the turn with the idea of you're going to fold the river if your opponent keeps betting on a blank is usually not such a great strategy because you're just losing more money. You're only winning in this spot when your opponent is very, very straightforward, and quite often your opponent just won't be very, very straightforward. So I would have called the river if I found myself there. I would have folded on the turn, but I would have called the river, which is not a situation you find yourself in too often, but it is a spot that comes up sometimes. Seven-five suited, you should pretty much always raise. It's not a great hand, but it's a fine hand. So I would raise it in that scenario. It's good to have the low suited connectors in your range. Those are hands your opponents typically won't expect you to have. It's nice to have what's called good board coverage, meaning whenever the board comes, let's say all low cards, normally if you raise like under the gun, you shouldn't have too many low cards, right? But if you have the 7-6 suited in your range, sometimes you're going to have the nuts when it comes 5-4-3 or whatever. In this scenario, I would call pre-flop, but I don't love it. You may also find squeezing is better. If you make it 1,300 in this spot, actually, well, you can't squeeze, you're too shallow. Going all in could be reasonable, but I would not do that given the pre-flop raise of this guy is 11. It's pretty tight, so I guess I would just call. I would not lead this flop. When you lead, what's going to happen is you're mainly going to be getting called by 10s and better, which you actually are crushed by for the most part, and 9, and then the good draws, and you block some of the draws, so it's you're most likely going to be getting called by value hands, and that's not really what you want. I would definitely check this turn. This is a classic example of a marginal made hand and a draw. And when you have a marginal made hand and a draw, you want to check because when you get called, you're usually going to be well behind. In this scenario, though, if you check and your opponent bets, you can easily call it off with your okay made hand and okay draw. So I would check in this spot. But your opponent folds. I mean, that's one of the spots where if your opponent will fold, pocket aces, then clearly your play is great. But I don't count on people making big folds in general. And for that reason, I'm not making that play. So here you do like to squeeze with the ace-jack. If you get jammed on, you need to fold, of course. Opponent checks, you need to bet tiny. In this spot, when you put your opponent all in, he's going to call perfectly, right? If he has a pair, he's going to call. If he doesn't have a pair, he's going to fold. And instead of making this play, you could bet small. And now you may induce your opponent to bluff all in on you, in which case you reluctantly have to call. And if your opponent folds, that's fine. And if your opponent calls with a hand like, ace 7, that's also fine, right? So when you jam, again, what's going to happen is you're forcing your opponent to play honestly. And, that works until they just make a hand that's better than yours and then you lose. So you have to be very careful with that strategy of blasting it because, you really just shouldn't do it. You're going to find that very often big bet sizes are not ideal because when you bet big and get called, you're in awful shape. All right, so here's a spot that comes up somewhat often. Let's say we did have 8/3 pre-flop raise VPIP on our opponent here. I would definitely raise any 2 cards. This is a spot where this player is going to be very, very nitty, very, very tight, and you can raise to 3.5 big blinds and make him fold almost everything. Even then, I would probably just limp this. You have to put in 60 chips to try to win a pot that's going to be, I don't even know, it's going to be a lot. 60 to win, call it 360. So you need to realize your equity 16% of the time. And, you're going to. It's not a good hand, but it's hard to not win, or hard to not realize your equity 16% of the time. Like right here, notice a big all in. This is what I told you not to do earlier with the ace queen. When you get called, this guy here is going to have something very good, almost always, unless he's just a lunatic. Oh, he's a lunatic, so good. That's not going to happen in $25,000 buy-in tournaments, though. So you need to practice as if we are playing for real. Don't practice as if we are playing against players who don't care about the money they're playing for. That's going to be something we probably will end up discussing, especially if you're going to be playing smallish stakes games online. Some people just don't care, right? But in the $25,000 game, everyone will care. All right, here we have you limping ace 7 offsuit. I would definitely not limp anything. You want to raise or fold every hand you're going to play. There are ways to develop a reasonable limping strategy, but I would just suggest you not even attempt to do that. It's quite hard to balance and quite hard to do, and we don't have time for that. You're going to be much better off raising or folding, and from this position, you do not need to raise or even play ace 5 offsuit because it's too likely one of these players yet to act will have something that has ace 5 in bad shape, and even if you do get an ace, you never really love it. Right here, I'm fine with raising or calling on the flop. When you raise, you're essentially trying to clean up your equity by making your opponents fold over cards. And it also gives you some bluffing opportunities if a club comes on the turn, or an ace or a 5, you have the best hand. I guess I would just check here. And on this river, I think you probably need to bluff. It's a weird spot because when it checks down, you're probably not going to win, right? But when it runs off Jack, Queen, your opponent may start folding. Opponents may fold out a 6, maybe even a 10 if you bet big. So I think this is a pretty nice spot to bet pot or close to pot. Because notice now, we're trying to get our opponents to fold out pretty good made hands. If we're trying to get them to fold out pretty good made hands, we need to bet on the big side. But you check and you lose to a 10. So like right here, I don't know if your opponents would fold this hand. In high stakes games, they would at least consider it. I'm not going to say they always would fold it, but they would at least consider folding it. But they're only going to consider folding it if you bet on the bigger side. You're essentially saying I backdoored 2 pair or I turned 2 pair, something like that. And they're going to have a difficult time calling. Same thing from the small blind. We definitely need to work on your small blind strategy. Like right here, you have, I think I said 5 hands earlier. We have 19 hands on this guy. The number on the right is the number of hands, obviously. In this spot, if you're playing 11-6 over 19 hands, I would definitely raise any 2 cards. I know 19 hands is not a lot, but if someone sits there and just doesn't play hands and you've been reasonable, then I would raise any 2 cards from the small blind to 3.5 or 4 big blinds. Definitely don't fold. King 2 is fine. It's better than an average hand pretty much. And you're folding it getting 6-1 pot odds. That is a significant mistake. All right, we have a limper, and you like to raise tiny. This is also a significant mistake, because think about this. What's going to happen when you limp? This player is going to call your raise, or when you're facing the limp, this player is going to call your raise essentially every time. And when he calls, well, you're in position, but you have ace-5 offsuit, which is terrible. So when you are raising limps, you typically want to raise to about the size of the pot, or you just want to fold. Or a limp behind. I mean, with this ace-5, I would just fold. I wouldn't even play this hand. It's awful. If I am going to raise, though, I'd raise to about the size of the pot, which is 3 times the last bet, which is 150. So 450, plus any additional money in the pot, which is, let's call it 350. So 450 plus 350 is 700. Notice that's way more than what you made it here. When you make it 315, this guy is literally never going to fold. Instead, he decides to re-raise you. That's nice. Now you must fold. This guy's going to have a really good hand. When people limp re-raise, they just have strong hands. So do not get involved in these spots. When the guy bets, I guess I would jam, but sure is unfortunate. Sure enough, the guy has ace-king and decided to call it off with this absolute nothing. I mean, this was a big, big mistake by you. I would definitely not do this. Like I said, I would have just folded pre-flop because ace-5 is awful. We may find that you drastically overvalue ace-x. That's something I did when I first started, and I lost lots and lots of money, and I figured out that that's not a good thing to do. So ace-x is not a good hand. Guy raises, I would re-raise small in this spot or call. So when you're shallow stacked, and notice right here we are playing only 25 big blinds deep, you typically want to ensure you get maximum value from your premium hands. Now, in a generic situation, I would definitely say all in with any hand you plan on jamming or re-raising. But with exactly aces and kings against players who do not know you, you can re-raise tiny, or you can call. And that's going to result in them calling you a lot, which is fine. Or it's going to result in you seeing a flop in position, which is fine, with a very, very premium hand. And this is a rare instance where I will really try to be exploitable because we really need to get money in the pot when we have a huge range advantage. Or a huge advantage with our exact hand. We don't have a huge range advantage, but we have a huge advantage with our exact hand. When you jam, that forces the opponent to play well. And you don't really want the opponent to play well. You want the opponent to mess up. Turns out he does have ace-3 suited. This guy would have been much better off just open jamming pre-flop, by the way. When he raises and you jam, now all of a sudden he's getting a roughly break-even scenario or maybe even a slight losing scenario. But if he just open jams, it's an easily plus EV play. He could also limp, have you raise, and then he could jam. I think that would be reasonable too. But he basically played it the worst way he possibly could because once you jam here, he needs to win 43% of the time. And you're going to find that ace-3 suited really just does not... I mean, it's like close, right? It's a close spot. You're going to win probably right about that amount. And you don't want to be in a close spot. You'd much rather have fold equity by just open jamming, forcing you and the big blind to mess up. And that's going to go way better for him. All right, here we have a raise from a pretty loose player and then a jam from a snug player. Normally, when it goes raise jam, you need to fold hands like pocket nines because the jammer should have mostly aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, 7s, which you're behind against, and then big cards, which are also flipping against. So either you are flipping or a little bit behind on average, which is not good. And you have to worry about the opener. Here, you don't have to worry about the opener so much because the opener should be way looser than normal. I mean, this is a very, very loose player. So I would be okay getting it in here, but understand, like, if this was in a $25,000 tournament against good players, I would just fold this. It's not the greatest spot to be in. Like, if you had tens, fine, you have to play. If you have ace king, you have to play. If you have ace queen, you probably have to play. But like ace jack, pocket eights, those are definite folds. And this is one of these hands that's on the cusp. So you may want to play, you may not want to play. But in general, I think you're going to need to fold in this spot just because you're going to be against a lot of overpairs. Like right here, this guy's shove with ace seven is going to be a losing play most of the time. So again, this is another example of this player messing up, right? When people mess up, you're going to make money, but you can't count on good players messing up so bad. That said, I mean, you may find in this $25,000 tournament, you're against a lot of very, very recreational players. And if that's the case, then that's great. All right, here it goes limp, limp, and you like to just blast it with your queens. This is another big mistake. You need to get value from your hands. And also, you have to ask, which hands do you really want to be blasting it with? What's happening here is you're going to win a tiny pot with your queens instead of having the potential to stack someone. You want to get all the money in with the queens, and when you go all in like this, you're not going to get all the money in unless your opponents have a really good hand. This guy does call it off, and he has jacks. So as you see, if you just raise smaller, you would have gotten called by a lot of worse stuff, and also the jacks probably still would have just jammed on you and would have gotten all in anyway. So by raising big here, you don't let anyone stick around with 10-9, which maybe sees a ace-ace-9 flop and decides to put a lot of money in, or ace-3, which of course you lose to ace-3. You have to get over the idea that you were trying to protect your hand, and instead you need to be concerned with maximizing value and also playing more hands in a profitable manner. Like right there, jamming your queens is fine and profitable, but you cannot play any other hands in that manner. And you want to try to figure out a way to play as many hands in a profitable manner as you possibly can, within reason, because that's going to allow you to profit with more and more holdings, right? Like imagine you just sit here and you only went all in with aces, kings, queens, jacks, and ace king. Yeah, you're going to profit with those hands, but you lose with everything else, right? Because you're paying the blinds. And that's kind of what you do when you use that strategy of making huge bets with your good hands. All right, here you raise 9-8 suited and just check fold. That is good. All right, so most of these videos are going to be about 20 minutes long, I imagine, because I have a baby I have to deal with. He's waking up. He's in a monitor right here. I can see him. We're going to keep going through this, and I will send these to you as I make them. Thanks for sending them in, and I'm looking forward to this process. Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Little. I hope you're enjoying this Thanksgiving Day marathon. I hope you're learning a lot and having a great time. Let me tell you for a minute about the 25K Platinum Coaching Sessions that I did with Nikhil Segel. Nikhil came to me because he was given a $25,000 buy-in to the PokerStars Players Championship, which was a gigantic $10 million buy-in event where many of the players were actually just given free-rolled their entry. Nikhil got his free roll because he went through a life-changing transformation in his health. He was in awful shape. He got rid of all of his bad habits, and now he's in great shape. And that was inspiring to me. So he asked if I would coach him for this tournament. I said, sure, as long as I can record it and then use it to help other people. So Nikhil was in India, and India is on like the exact opposite time zone from where I am. So what we decided to do is have Nikhil play online, send me the hand histories. I would record my analysis over the hand histories and send them back. We did this back and forth exchange 15 times, and he went from being a very loose, splashy, not so good player to by the end of it, he had actually won a tournament online. He significantly improved his skills and then went out to the PokerStars Players Championship and made it through day one with 3 starting stacks just due to purely a slow grind up. But then he lost a flip on day 2 for, well, $150,000 in equity. And you have to win flips to win at poker tournaments. This coaching session is great. I've had many students say it was by far the most influential course of mine they have seen, and I'm sure it will help you improve your skills too. So go check it out right now at pokercoaching.com/Black Friday to get your copy and start improving your skills right now.